Ever wondered what secularism really means? It is a big idea with a lot of history and debate around it. Join us as we break it down, where it comes from, what it means today, and why some people have issues with it. Stay tuned. Secularism is one of the relatively new concepts in philosophy, particularly in politics. This term is used in various contexts. Some refers to it as a positive and integral aspect of democracy, while for others it is considered negative. To better understand this concept, it is worth examining its etymology. Secularism comes from the Latin word saeculum. In its literal sense, saeculum refers to an 80 to 100 year period, which can be understood as equivalent to the length of time roughly equal to the potential lifetime of a person. Considering that gods or deities were considered timeless and not limited to a specific era, this concept metaphorically referred to the worldly as opposed to the divine and religious. Over time, the second meaning became more common and eventually turned into the primary meaning. Thus, anything described as secular is perceived as separate from religion and the divine realm. This separation does not necessarily carry a value judgment. For example, everyday activities like walking or eating are secular. However, if someone's religion dictates what they can or cannot eat, then their eating habits cease to be secular. As mentioned, secularism is a relatively new concept. Since the Age of Enlightenment and the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe, religion, especially the Church, gradually lost its prominence. In the past, religion was the main guide for what was considered right or wrong. But as time passed, people began to view themselves as independent individuals. Instead of relying solely on religious teachings, they started using human reason and logic to judge many aspects of life. George Jacob Holyoake, a British writer and thinker in the mid-19th century, was the first person to use the term secularism. Back then, the main debate was between believers and non-believers, and Holyoake sought to find a middle ground between the two. Thus, the secularism Holyoake spoke of was a philosophical attitude claiming that the correctness and incorrectness of matters should be determined independently of religious beliefs and not necessarily against or in contrast to them. Although Holyoake coined the term secularism from the word secularity, the meaning of secularism did not remain confined to his definition. Over time, any independence from religious beliefs and definitions became called secularism. Therefore, like almost all concepts in humanities, this concept encompasses a spectrum. Radical and strict secularists are against religion and consider all religious beliefs misleading and false, while liberal or moderate secularists not only are not against religion, but also try to speak publicly in a language and logic that is acceptable to everyone, regardless of their religious beliefs. With this definition, it is possible for someone to be religious but still be secular and behave secularly. In this case, the individual's personal life and beliefs are influenced by religion, but when they enter society, they resort to a universally understandable and rational logic to justify their views or behavior. From the 20th century onwards, secularism emerged more prominently in politics than in any other field. This matter progressed to the point that today, secularism is considered a part of politics, and other aspects of this ideology have become less prominent. In politics, the most prevalent form of secularism is secularism in governance. By secularism in governments, we mean the impartiality of the government regarding religion, which we will delve into further. However, the formation of this idea dates back to before the emergence of secularism. In the realm of thought, John Locke was the first to address the necessity of separating the church from the state. As mentioned earlier, in the Middle Ages, the value system and the determination of right and wrong were in the hands of the church and Christianity, and in a way, the law was also the religion. Kings with the support of the church ruled with the idea of divine right. Locke, on the other hand, saw the right to rule as stemming from the consent of the governed, not divine right. Furthermore, based on arguments within Christianity, Locke rejects the possibility of everyone reaching one truth and for this reason prohibits the government from interfering in religious matters. These opinions, which form the basis of liberal thought, introduced the idea of the necessity of separating religion from government into politics. The idea later evolved and was implemented for the first time in the real world in the United States of America, and according to the First Amendment to the Constitution of this country, government neutrality towards religion was guaranteed. Thus, the concept of separating a state from church took shape and gradually spread to the rest of the world. The spread of this issue to non-Christian societies on the one hand, and the emergence of secularism on the other hand, led to the emergence of a new phrase called secular state. Today, various principles for the secular state are mentioned, but the most famous of these principles are as follows. First, the government neither promotes nor rejects any particular religion. Second, citizens are free to have any belief they want, and the government does not discriminate between its citizens based on their beliefs. Third, religious institutions have no role in the country's practical policies. And finally, the government does not interfere in religious matters or religious institutions. As we mentioned, when talking about secularism today, these are mostly the concepts under discussion. However, some secularists take this issue one step further. That is, if in the concept of the secular state, we talk about the separation of a state and religion, these individuals talk about the separation of politics and religion. The difference between these two perspectives lie in the fact that those who believe in the separation of a state and religion recognize that an individual can bring their beliefs and values from their religion to society. However, the state does not have the right to interfere with or endorse the opinion of that individual. Moreover, if that individual comes to power, they do not have the right to impose their opinions on others. In contrast, believers in the separation of politics from religion believe that religion fundamentally belongs to the private sphere, and individuals do not have the right to present their religious beliefs in society and act based on them. Many people use the term secularism for the first perspective, which is the separation of religion from a state, and the French word laicity for the second perspective, which is the separation of religion from politics. Perhaps the adjective derived from the noun laicité, which is laïque, is more familiar. However, the reality is that this distinction is not accurate. The word laïcité has Greek roots and can be somewhat understood as civil or human. But in reality, the French equivalent of secularism is laïcité. Laïcité is part of the French constitution that addresses the separation of religion from state. However, due to historical background, this dichotomy is created in the minds of the audience. Unlike the United States, which has established a secular state from the beginning, France reached secularism through a long and challenging process, and this process led to serious waves of opposition to religion. According to a not-so-strong claim, it can be said that in America, the goal of secularism has been more to preserve the religion of individuals against the state, and in France, the goal of laïcité has been to preserve the state against religious interference. This issue has led to differences in the understanding of laïcité and secularism, although in fact these two words are the same. Now it's not a bad idea to mention some criticism of secularism. The first criticism comes from believers in religion who see following their own beliefs as the only way to human happiness. It is understandable that this group has fundamental problems with secularism. The next criticism, a bit lighter than the first, also comes from believers in religion. This group, despite their religious beliefs, believe in tolerance, but they consider the current materialistic path of society as a decline and advocate a return to religious beliefs as the way to salvation. In their view, secularism has created a vacuum in society that it couldn't fill, but their belief in tolerance prevents them from imposing their views on society, and they try to prove their opinions through reasoning and in the framework of modern values such as democracy. Another criticism is not aimed at secularism itself, but at those supporters who consider it equivalent to democracy. In response, it is pointed out by many critics that many great dictatorships in history, such as Nazi Germany and Communist Russia, were secular but still had no relative democracy. According to this group of critics, what is synonymous with democracy is toleration rather than secularism. The final criticism that we address here is from a philosophical standpoint and is more directed toward believers in the necessity of separating religion from politics. These critics believe that the origins of people's belief and value systems are different, and it is impossible to force everyone to follow a particular pattern. However, from this group's perspective, apart from individuals' beliefs, what should serve as the basis for argumentation within society is a secular stance. Therefore, individuals who have reached certain beliefs through different paths cannot advance their actions in society with the same religious arguments, and it is necessary for them to pursue their goals in a context that is independent of religious beliefs and to promote them there. It was a brief overview of secularism. If you found this content informative, please like it and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to share your thoughts, comments, and ideas for future topics in the comment section. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.